Hi everyone, I'm Sophie. I work for Star Academies, a multi-academy trust with schools across the country. I'm not a teacher, but I'm privileged to work with teachers and school leaders as part of my job. I am a mum, and while the summer holidays are in sight, I'm still conscious of the importance of keeping my kids engaged with learning to ensure they're ready for the return to school whenever that happens. To accompany our home learning advice line, StarLine, we're hosting a weekly broadcast with a range of guests to cover different ideas to help you keep your kids learning and happy. This week, we're joined by Emily Owen from the Education Centre at the Houses of Parliament for the one about helping children with curious minds to explore the news. We get our news from lots of sources, the TV, social media, newspapers and more. And what's going on in the world presents a great learning opportunity for young people. Emily's going to share ideas on how to help children process and think critically about topics covered on the news, how to identify fake news, and suggestions on resources to use to link current events with their learning. So thank you so much for joining us, Emily.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And so I guess my first question is, why is it important to talk to children about the news?
Well, I think you've covered from the introduction, you've covered it already in the fact that we live in such a media saturated society. And I think through that, we now have access to the news all the time. And I think particularly living in the middle of a pandemic, we cannot get away from the news. And the news is filtered into our social media feeds. It's filtered into our everyday conversations. And I think that children are therefore exposed to it even more, particularly as I said, they see it on their social media feeds. And often when they see it on their social media feeds, it's not necessarily pure or in its purest form. You've got opinions mixed up in there. You've got it could be hearsay, what's been shared. It's not always exactly as perhaps a news source might have reported it. So I think that's why it's so important that our young people are exposed to the right news, and they should be watching the news, of course, but we need to give them the tools to be able to find out what's good news, what's real news, and to be able to identify what is fake news, and to encourage them to do that in a really curious way, with an open mind, because we don't want to scare them and we don't want to put them off exploring the news, but I think that there are tools that they need in the world that we live in today.
Yeah, absolutely. And there can be some heavy and complicated events or topics covered in the media. How can parents and carers help children to be curious about what's going on and form well-founded opinions about what they see?
I think the best thing that they can do is actually explore the news with their children, and model that exploration with them. So I always suggest to parents that they actually sit and talk about the news around the dinner table, and whilst they do that, to play devil's advocate. So to kind of constantly keep asking, well, why do you think that? Where do you think that idea's come from? And well, what if you have an alternative view and opinion to that? And so really kind of open up that conversation, and help them to be curious and really think about, well, actually, why do I think that? Why have I taken that view from the news and not this view from the news, as it were? And I think as well, kind of acknowledging that there is some really tough stuff that's talked about in the news, acknowledging the fact that you as a parent might not be able to answer all their questions, but not shutting down that conversation, and keeping that conversation open, and just explore as many different news sources as possible with your children, I think is a key thing. Not just getting it from your social media feeds, actually sitting with them and exploring different news sources. So going to the internet, and looking at BBC News, but also perhaps buying a newspaper and exploring that newspaper with them and being like, well, how is this different to what we just read on BBC News, or in, I don't know, whatever newspaper it is that you happen to be reading. So I think it's about, it's just about giving them as many different sources as possible, and doing it with them. I think that's absolutely crucial to show that you're exploring alongside them. It's not just about them, it's about you doing it together as a team.
Yeah, absolutely. I find my kids often overhear things on the radio when I'm driving, and they're in the back seat, and you have to kind of think on your feet a little bit because you get such a small snippet on the radio. And so I've often had to say, let's really explore that when we've got some time, because we're on our way to school, or not at the moment, but on our way to school. And so, I think that talking about it and unpicking and not going by that headline that was shared on the radio is really important. And you've touched on this a bit, but there can be a lot of fake news out there, particularly on social media, and older children who might be accessing that social media will be seeing that for themselves. Do you have any tips that parents and carers can use with children to help them spot and explain fake news?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's key to really explain exactly what fake news is to them, and keep it as simple as possible. So fake news is news that's been shared, whether that be deliberately or not deliberately, which gives out information that's wrong. And you can split it into two categories, misinformation and disinformation. Okay. So misinformation is when it's been shared not deliberately. So it might have been shared by accident, and it happens to be wrong. Disinformation is when it's been shared deliberately. So you're sharing fake news for a deliberate purpose, whatever that purpose might be. And I think the key thing really is to kind of communicate with your children that you need to pause when you see a news article or you read something. We often, the emotion just goes straight. We go straight for the emotion. And we think, right, I want to share that, or I want to get angry about that. And actually it's like, well, pause for a second, just stop, read it properly all the way through, because so often, even as adults, we just read the little blurb at the top, and we don't read the entire article. And journalists and news sources and media sources are very clever, and they give us all the information, like just almost not distorted, but it's not quite what it really means in that first initial paragraph, and you can read on and you're like, oh, actually maybe this isn't what I thought it was. So just pausing for a second, make sure you're reading all of it before you click that send or share or get angry about it. And I think encouraging your child to be an investigator, and because you want to, the whole point of exploring and making sure that we don't have fake news in society is that we have to verify our sources. We've got to look at where the information is really coming from. So I always frame it, particularly with little ones, is that we're investigating and we're finding out whether this source is real. And asking that question, well, does it sound real? If it doesn't seem plausible, then it probably isn't. If it doesn't seem real, it's probably not. So look into it further. And can you find that story explored in another news source? So are there multiple news sources that are talking about this, or is it just on Twitter, or is it just on Facebook, or wherever it is that it's been seen? So really kind of verifying that information with them, and checking as well, just if it's especially on the internet, just checking the URL, so checking the web address, and seeing whether it sounds real or looks real. So it's very simple things that you as parents can do with your children. I think comes back to what we said before, is about doing this together to build those skills, because you're trying to make your young people media literate. I think that's the key thing, is what we're trying to do here. And because fake news, it spreads because of emotional responses, and because of that automatic, oh my gosh, that's really bad, I need to share this, I need to send this out, and whether it's fake or not, we need to take that time before we share it, because does it really correspond with how we feel? Does it really link to the views and opinions we have?
That's
so
helpful. And that idea of media literate and helping our children to be kind of aware about what the news is saying and how to digest it, how to read it, and what they need to ask themselves about what they see is really useful, and for all of us to think about. That's great, thank you. And I mentioned the connection between the news and the curriculum in school and what we learn in school. Would you recommend any good resources out there that parents and carers can use to extend children's learning about things they see in the news?
Yeah, of course. So there's actually loads out there, and particularly at the moment, I think obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic, and there's lots of fake news about that pandemic, and obviously we've seen on TV the Black Lives Matter protests, and there's lots of things going on at the moment, and I think the key thing to remember when you're exploring all the things that are happening at the moment in the news is to look after yourself, and to look after the young people that are in your care as well. Sometimes we do need to take a step back from the news, and I think that's really key to remember. But Newsround do this really, really well. I think they give a very balanced and fair report on all sorts of different things, but particularly recently the George Floyd killings. They've got really age-appropriate resources, and their report straight after the report that they give, really detailed report actually, about the George Floyd killings and how young people have responded to it in America. They give a video about what to do if you're feeling upset about racism, and I think that's really crucial, is making sure that you're looking for resources that do think about young people's well-being, particularly when you're exploring things that are going on in the world at the moment, and sources like Newsround do that really well. There's also the BBC website, it's called Fact or Fake. And that has got loads of video content around exploring what fake news is, exploring wider issues within the media with young people and how they can be really good investigators, like we were talking about before, how they can verify information, how they can spot fake news. So that's really good to have a look at. Shout Out UK as well have been working in collaboration with various partners to create some media literacy animations, again talking about how to spot fake news. So that explores the topic in quite a lot of detail. And then sources that can help you actually just watch the news with your young people. There's First News, so they are basically a newspaper for young people, and they do it in age appropriate language. They report on things that are happening right now in really age appropriate language. You've got the Week Junior, that's another one very similar, but comes out every week, and kind of gives a coverage of the week's events. And BBC Bite Size as well, they've got some interesting resources. So there's loads out there, and I could probably kind of go on and on, but I don't want to overwhelm people.
That's great, and we'll share those links underneath the broadcast, so thank you for sharing those. We also, one of our partners on StarLine, Oak Academy, are sharing a series of PSHE lessons on the Black Lives Matter protests next week, so this week rather, so they'll be available for primary aged children, so we'll share the link to that as well. Thank you so much, Emily, for joining us, and it's really helpful to think about how we can talk to our kids about the news and also help them process what they're seeing. So thanks so much for joining us.
A pleasure.
With 4 weeks left until the summer holidays and the prospect for many children not returning to school until September, we want you to know that StarLine is here to help. For more personalised advice and guidance, we would encourage you to call StarLine on the number at the bottom of the screen. That's 0330 313 9162. You can also contact us via our website, starline.org.uk, and via Facebook. Search for StarLine Helpline. Next week, we're joined by Alex Quigley, who's going to share some ideas based on research about how we as parents at home can support our children to develop their literacy skills and to learn effectively at home. We look forward to seeing you then. In the meantime, stay safe.